Hey friends, we are here today in Mark chapter 3. So Mark chapter 3 starts off with Jesus goes into the synagogue, and it doesn't say that this guy was planted in there in this gospel, but it's pretty clear if you read the three synoptic gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that the Pharisees planted this guy in there with a withered hand, and they wanted to see whether or not Jesus was going to heal him. And so Jesus, knowing the trap, kind of looks at everybody in the room and he says, is it lawful? Not lawful. He says, is it right? He says, is it right to heal someone on the Sabbath or to do harm to someone on the Sabbath? I don't think the intention of this is very clear. But these guys, it says after this whole thing happened, that these guys go out and they plot to kill Jesus. So Jesus, seeing this trap, asks this question, and then in front of everybody kind of makes a show of it, it appears, makes a show of it, and heals the man's hand right in front of everybody. Just clearly defiant. This is what I'm doing. I'm healing this man's hand. There's not a thing you can do about it. And so they're like, well, that's enough for us. He's doing work on the Sabbath, and we're gonna get him. But it's interesting what he said. He says, is it right to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath? He's kind of showing us, because they didn't see it, the hypocrisy of these people. Because they planted this guy here just so they could plot to kill Jesus. Killing Jesus for healing someone nonetheless. But the problem is not that they healed him, but that he healed him on the Sabbath. And yet these guys go out and plot to kill Jesus on the Sabbath. So what's worse? It's kind of, I mentioned this a couple days ago when we were in the book of Romans, but I had this pastor who had this friend who was swearing in front of him, and he had a conviction that he shouldn't swear, and so the pastor, when he was very young, punched this other kid in the face because he was saying swear words. And it's kind of like, you're missing the more important thing here. It's worse to punch someone in the face than it is to say a swear word. You probably shouldn't do either, but one's worse than another. But here, there's really nothing wrong with doing things on the Sabbath. It's just something that they just kind of made up. It's like an embellishment. It's legalism, really. And it's horrible because it praises the law over God. It's a worship of something that God created rather than worshiping God himself. So that's what's happening here. I won't go into everything that's happening in this chapter, but it says in the next pericope there that Jesus, he calls his 12 disciples. He had already called Andrew and Peter and James and John, and so he just needed to call the other 8. And so he does. He gets his crew together, his entourage, and so he gets them together. And at some point, this is something that I want to highlight, people start seeing this crowd and they're kind of like speaking out against it. Everybody's trying to talk to Jesus, and they say, oh, he's casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub, which is another way of saying, Satan. It's another way of saying, I think it literally means, the Lord of the Flies, or some people would call it the Lord of the, it's called Lord of the Flies because flies will kind of hover around a mound of manure. So the word Beelzebub was something that they would often attribute to Baal worship. It means like Baal, which really just kind of is a word for Lord. And then Zebub means mountain. So it's like, he's like the Lord of the mountain. But the Jews made up the term Beelzebul because it's, it's making fun of this idea. Rather than he's the king of the mountain, he's the king of the hill of crap. Sorry for using harsh language here. Whoa, the wind's coming. Anyways, Jesus kind of says this doesn't make any sense. If I'm casting out demons and I'm with the Lord of the demons, then how does that make any sense? A house divided by itself won't stand. And he said what does make sense, what's more likely here, is that a strong man comes and binds up the people and then takes their possessions. So he's saying, like, I'm the strong man, this is what I'm doing here. I'm not part of a, I'm not one of them. I'm taking them over. It's pretty clear what he's saying. But the part that is interesting, though, is that when he's still talking about this, he says, you can blaspheme the Father and you can blaspheme the Son, but essentially you will not be forgiven for blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Now, this is not a very clear passage. I don't exactly know what it means, but I have my best guess, and so that's what I'll present to you. It's clear that he's talking about how these people have seen Jesus do these miracles, and yet they don't believe him. And so they're rejecting him. They're rejecting him even though all the evidence points to the fact that he is the Messiah, and that he's the Son of God, and that he has power over death, and he has power over creation. So they see that, and he's rejecting it. So he's saying, this is the unforgivable sin, is rejecting Jesus. Now the question comes up, why does he call it blasphemy of the Holy Spirit? It seems like this would be blasphemy against the Son. And what I think is happening here is that Jesus is saying, you can say whatever you want about me. What you're saying, just go ahead and say it. You can be forgiven for saying this. But what you will not be forgiven for is when your spirit rejects the Spirit of God. So he's letting them know, say what you want, but just know that if your spirit rejects the Holy Spirit, you will never be forgiven. So what does that mean for us? It means that, sometimes people say that they believe in God and they don't. And some people say that they don't, but deep down they do. I'm not saying what that means about their salvation. I'm just saying that this verse really should scare people that do reject the Holy Spirit. But it should not scare the people that are worried that they might have done some sort of sin that God can't forgive. The truth is that God can forgive any sin. And you just need to make sure that you're not rejecting him. So, last thing I want to highlight, and this is kind of weird, and I think it's important to highlight this because this is the only gospel that talks about this part. So he's in this house speaking to these people, and then the mother And the brothers of Jesus kind of come to the door and they're like, this guy's out of his mind, Look, they're saying, Jesus here, he's gone crazy, everybody. And so he knocks on the door and Jesus says, they said, tell Jesus we're out here, we want to talk to him. And so everybody's like, hey, your mother and your brother are here. And Jesus says, who are my mother and my brother? And he's like, you guys here with me, you are my mother and my brother and my sisters, He's saying, you're my family. Now this is something that's supported by something that was also in the book of Romans, when it talks about Father Abraham and how we are his offspring through faith. So if you want to be part of the family of God, it's through faith. And his mother and his brother, they are not showing faith in him, so they're not part of his family. That's the point that I believe Jesus is trying to make here. The thing that is hard to understand is that Mary knows that he's the Messiah. She was told, much less, she bore him as a virgin. So she knew who he was. But yet she doesn't have faith in him right now. She knows who he is, but she's not trusting him. So Jesus is saying, even she is not, she's not being faithful. So later on we find out that Jesus' brothers, James and Jude, they go on to be main leaders of the early church. So, they obviously caught on also. So yeah, but that should speak to us also, Sometimes we can know in our mind, but we don't follow Jesus like we should. We don't have faith like we should. So, yeah, this is a very, very interesting part. I think one other thing that's important about this part is that this book, the Gospel of Mark, it's raw, it's not a cleaned up gospel. It's not him trying to sugarcoat things. This is exactly what happened. This is the rawest that it's gonna get, and so it makes it a little bit more reliable. It's nice to know that he could have just covered this part up, but he didn't. This is a real this is a real account. So anyways, that is Mark chapter 3. Have a great day.